Hey everybody, so we're back in Port Carbon, Pennsylvania, in Schuylkill County. We are at the Mother Allison Memorial here in the Presbyterian Cemetery in Port Carbon. Mother Allison, her name was Angus Smart Allison. She lost 4 sons in the Civil War, including 2 sons on the same day. So we're going to go a little bit more into this monument, and then we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about her loss, about her sons, where they passed, what they did in their sacrifices, and then talk about a couple other things and read a letter from Abraham Lincoln to another woman who lost a bunch of her sons as well. So here we have erected July 4th, 1908 in memory of Mrs. Angus Smart Allison, the mother of George Allison, killed at Spotsylvania, May 1864. James Allison, killed at Grove Church, Virginia, June 1864. Alexander Allison, killed at Salem Heights, Virginia, May 1863, and John Allison, killed at Salem Heights, Virginia, May 1863. And then we go here to George Allison, age 33, Company K, 56 Pennsylvania Volunteers. John Allison, age 23, Company C, 96 Pennsylvania Volunteers. Alexander Allison, age 26 years, Company C, 96 Pennsylvania Volunteers. And James Allison, age 28 years, Company G, 48 Pennsylvania Volunteers. She certainly gave a lot. The interesting thing too is only one son was brought back. We will go more in depth in that. I believe this here, is this her? No, that's somebody else's. But anyways, his son is buried here with her. I think it was one of the 2 sons that was killed in 1863 at Salem Heights. The other one, I guess they never were able to identify him, and he's probably buried in an unmarked grave down there in Virginia. But truly is a sad and surreal monument. Certainly needs to be here. Certainly a person that deserves to be remembered for that sacrifice, a mother that lost 4 of her sons. As we walk down through here too, I'm going to talk a little bit. I just got to be a little careful. But this cemetery in particular, this Presbyterian Cemetery, there are flags everywhere. Like Port Carbon, I think they sent 513 of their sons to the Civil War. We went to the other monument that's up on the hill, and really stunning the sacrifices that they made here. But there is a ton of men here that certainly served in the Civil War, and others that passed as well. Jake Wynn, who's a historian, he does a blog called Winning History. I actually got a lot of the information that's going to be in this video from him, and then the rest from like Find a Grave. Just talking a little more in depth when they volunteered, where they were killed, a little more information on that, where they're actually even buried. 3 of them are down there in Virginia, but it really is a sad story. But Jake did such a great job with his blog. There's so much information there. So I want to give a shout out to Jake Wynn, and I also plan on putting his blog, like Laura Klotz, who does Market Quest. They do phenomenal work in preserving history, and the research they do is unbelievable, which makes this video possible. Because I didn't even know about this. I didn't know about the monument, the Civil War Century Monument that's up on the hill there, that looks over the town of Port Carbon here. But saw it, went there, and then this is very much the same thing. And I started reading about, okay, there's more here. And I also want to say a special thank you to Jay Forkner. He sent a bunch of information as well that I'm going to use in this video. It's always nice you have somebody that's willing to do a little bit of research and send that to you to help you out with doing this, because research does take quite a bit of time. But this is one of those videos that I tell you, it sort of hits you. What was she feeling? And the sad thing is, this other lady had gotten a letter, and we'll read it. It's beautiful and eloquent from Abraham Lincoln, but they never noticed this lady. And thankfully, some years later, 40 some years later, they started to say, hey, our Civil War vets are starting to pass away. We need to do something in these circumstances like this. And thankfully, the Port Carbon, the Grand Army of the Republic organization was like, we need to have a memorial for the mother specifically for losing 4 of her sons. And thank goodness they did that. There's this beautiful monument is here in Port Carbon, Pennsylvania. So as I said, I wanted to go further into this. They actually had the first 2 sons that were killed was Alexander Allison and John Allison. John Allison was actually the first one that was killed at Salem Church, or Salem Heights, I believe, is one of those two. But he had been killed first in 1863. Alexander had actually died 2 days later from his wounds. They're both buried down at the Fredericksburg National Battlefield. I guess John was recognizable and everything, but Alexander was buried basically where he fell by Confederate troops that had the battlefield. Eventually, they wound out moving him because they had a concerted effort to move those that had been killed and buried at other places to the other places for that national cemetery. So he's there somewhere, Alexander, but it's an unmarked grave. A year later, roughly, George Allison was the next one to be killed. He was actually killed rather close to the same place his brothers were killed. He is the only one to have been sent back, and he is actually buried there at this monument. Now, his last brother that fought in the war, James, was he had been killed a month later. The day after the funeral for George, she found out that her 4th son, James, had passed. Sadly, I believe it was Andrew was the 5th son. They say there's 6, but I only have record of 5. He lived to 1877, and I believe she died in 1887. So she actually outlived all 5 of her sons that I can find record of. And basically, there was no mention of it. We're going to talk about a letter that was sent to another lady who had lost at least 3 sons that Abraham Lincoln had written a letter to, which I think is quite beautiful. And unfortunately, Mother Allison never received that kind of commendation, if you will. So years later, when more interest was in, the Civil War and remembering things like this, they felt it was necessary to memorialize her suffering and what had actually happened, and that her 4 sons would also be remembered that gave everything to the cause of freedom. There was another woman, though. Her name was Lydia Bixby, and she had lost several sons during the service in the Civil War. So a letter was sent to her from Abraham Lincoln, and we're going to read this now. I feel how weak and fruitless must be any word of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming, but I cannot refrain from tendering you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the republic they died to save. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. I think, if anything, this reminds us of how brutal war can be. Jake Wynn and History.net are where I got this information, is where I got the pictures from. Jake does a blog called Winning History, and it's absolutely phenomenal. He had also visited the Port Carbon Soldiers Monument that's up on the hill that we visited. And it's really stunning. You get to see how a town would remember their veterans. And in this case, remember the mother that gave all. And the movie Saving Private Ryan may partially have been some influence on from the circumstances of the Lydia Bixby and Mother Allison. I think a lot of it came from, there was a ship, Navy ship, that got sunk that 4 brothers were on. After that's when they sort of decided we need to separate families. And that's, the Saving Private Ryan sort of came from that they didn't want to let family lines die out.
by having all the sons killed. But needless to say, on behalf of a grateful nation, she gave all. And, the terror of being, Gold Star Mother came along in World War II, but it was still that same idea of losing one son after another. And she lost 4 sons all within basically a year, and 2 of them on the same day. It's really, I don't think there's anything that you can do to comprehend that kind of loss. And that's what had to be done to have the country that we have here today. Freedom is not free, and this is just one of those reminders. So I think this is a great video to remember these folks. I also want to say thank you to Jay Forkner, because he had sent me the information that there's another monument here in Port Carbon. And so thank you to all of them. Jake Wynn, on his Winning History article, was phenomenal. Was instrumental in being able to make this video. So thank you to them all. Thank you to you all for coming along on another video here where we're remembering history, and even the painful side of it. And as always, I want to say thank you for coming along, and we'll see you all about town.